Friends for nearly 20 years, Mohamed and Krista talk revolution through the eyes of their Muslim and Indigenous perspectives. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Anti-Case Taro. I am here today with Mohamed Abdu, and the two of us are going to talk about several different topics that we're both interested in and have talked about over the years. As the intro for this said, this is going to be two friends of nearly 20 years in struggle having talks on politics. Mohamed has been on here before to be interviewed about his book, Islam and Anarchism. And we are just doing this as questions we created. And Mohamed, do you want to tell people about yourself, your Substack, your book clubs, and what's coming up?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, the most gracious and most merciful. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace and glad tidings be upon you, Ya Krista, our loved ones, and whoever inshallah might be listening at present and in the near future. As you know, I usually start anything that I say with Moses' prayer in the Quran when he was about to meet Pharaoh, accompanied by his brother Aaron. اللهم اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. اللهم اشرح لي صدري, O Creator, open thy breast, ويسر لي أمري, and make my and our affairs easy. And undo the knot on my tongue, such that what it is that I have to share with you, what we have to share amongst one another, reaches folks' hearts, minds, and spirits. I always say we are in the business of propaganda. And that is ultimately true, that though not in the condescending way that is often assumed by the right who also engage in the propaganda. But of course, there's a difference between information, knowledge, and that comes with a tremendous responsibility so far as Islam actually had the weight of bequeathing a new generation, our children, that knowledge. As much as journalism is also important in the exchange of information, it's true. The two are not one and the same. A little bit about myself. I'm a Muslim. I espouse anarchistic politics. We'll speak a little bit about that. I'm a settler of color on Turtle Island. I'm an African. I'm an Arab. I'm a set of conjunctive hands and not disjunctive force. And what I mean by that is that I'm multiplicity of many uncompartmentalized identities fused into one. And everything that I know, have yet to come to know, will never know, including that which I know and that I've rejected. That is part of the composite of who I am. I always say, when was the I developed? When I was a wee within my mother's womb. I breathed through her, I ate through her, I defecated even through her. So later on, after that umbilical cord is cut and severed, that is when one is socialized into an I, into an individualist. But alas, I'm a recovering academic at Ivy League institutions such as Columbia, such as Cornell, the University of Toronto, the American University of Cairo, Queen's University. Originally an engineer, then I did my BA and MA in sociology and PhD in interdisciplinary studies, the author of Islam and Anarchism. We're currently doing bi-weekly reading group hosted by the Queer Muslims of New York, which I'm very deeply humbled and honored by. Following this on the book, Islam and Anarchism, inshallah, following this, we'll be doing a reading of my doctoral manuscript that was on Islam and queer Muslims. Took 10 years to research, write, finished it in 2019, defended it in 2019. It is historical archival, so it involves case studies at preeminent institutions such as Al-Azhar University. But it's also ethnographic in the context of the Tahrir uprisings, interviews with queer Nubians, Sudanese, sex workers, and the Egyptian military, and so on and so forth, but also queer Black and non-Black Muslims the context of Turtle Island because it is impossible to understand queerness or gender separated from the circulatory dynamics of what happens between Turtle Island, or the settler colonial context of the US, Canada, etc., and so-called post-colonial nations that never engaged in the project of decolonization. But alas, inshallah will be the reading of that. Since being doxxed and being named in the congressional hearings, and being run out of Lenni territory, that is referred to as New York City, I moved back to Egypt, and let us put it this way: I'm professor, but more so a student of the Mujahideen, student of the Muqawma, specifically the Muqawma in Gaza, the resistance in Gaza. So I'm an Al-Qassam student, proudly. And I write on the Substack. The Substack is titled End Times. And yeah, but that's a very brief encapsulation, I guess. Yeah, who I am.
All right, and I will put links for people in the description to where to find that. And later on in this talk, we are going to cover some of those subjects for everybody today. Okay. So, but first, one of the things I thought is helpful in clearing up for people, since it's going to come up, is, what do we each mean by anarchist or anarchistic? Because neither of us identify with anarchism in the classic Euro-philosophical sense. I haven't even read Emma Goldman. Or several of the others. I don't even care to. But
Mhm.
that's also because I put a cap on my reading material that I only read 10% of white authors. So I think it helps us change what is going into our brain by what we choose to consume. So for me, as a Lakota, I'm Lakota. We were anarchistic. Um, and sometimes for me that is enough. Sometimes, I'll be specific, but I'll most likely or often clarify when I'm around other people using the term anarchist that I'm not that kind of anarchist. I have a different view of it. And I would also identify as an indigenous. And I think my favorite explanation of that is from Jacqueline, is it Lansky? I'm not going to remember the name, but I remember what she said, which was indigenism is different in different places at different times.
I agree with you entirely. For the longest time, I was the Muslim who didn't identify as an anarchist, but was an anarchist. What is the point of referring to myself as a Muslim anarchist or an anarchist Muslim? What comes first before the other? If Islam is inherently anarchistic. Of course, both are in unison so long as I do not utter the words Muslim anarchist and anarchist Muslim, because the moment that I do, one has to antecede or precede the other. The way they developed in my own work is a Quranic reading of anarchism and an anarchistic reading of the Quran. By that I mean a Quran that is inherently anti-authoritarian, anti-capitalist, anti-racist, anti-sexist, anti-queerphobic, anti-ableist. And of course, there's a difference between anti-something and being non-something. And this is where the decolonial moment comes out, because Islam possesses its own cosmology, its own concepts and practices that are non-capitalist, that are non-authoritarian. Um, Now, the idea of discussing anarchism, because it's precisely a 19th, 20th century turn of the discourse, political, philosophical orientation, is ultimately a way of bridging worlds, a building of worlds where all worlds fit, as the Zapatistas would call it, right? Addressing audiences, but there are many forms of anarchism too: indigenous anarchism, black anarchism, green anarchism, anarcho-feminism, and so on and so forth, right? You have read about Goldman and Bakunin and Kropotkin and so on and so forth. In so many ways, a lot of these were Jewish anarchists, but they shied away from addressing the spiritual dimension, which is very critical to both indigenous people as well as Muslims, to our mujahideen, to
Mhm.
even movements as the Zapatistas, who reject the label anarchism, although their politics may be defined as anarchistic. But this is part of the politics of translation, of mistranslation, if you will. A lot of scholars have written on this. Sabah Mahmoud, when everything is assumed that it has to be translated into Anglo-Saxon terms, words, concepts that cannot really capture the nuances, the interdisciplinary nature, the polymathic way in which we conceive of the words, right? For us, land is not an object. She is a subject with her own being, with her own breath, with her own resilience, nationhoods or conceptualizations of nationhoods, peoplehoods that we are supposed to live in symbiotic relationship to. Uh, so anarchists are also an extension in a certain sense because they're also Marxists. So yes, of course, one has read Marx and Engels and that entire discourse. So I'm not much of an ideologist, but I am an anti-statist and I am somebody who's anti-authoritarian. Make no mistake about that. And hence the difference between the world of the above, if you will, that certain ideas, including Marxism, capitulates to or reproduces or reifies versus the world of the below, which anarchisms, let's just put it that way, because there's no Islam, there's no monolithic anarchism, there's no monolithic Islam. These are multiplicity of different interpretations. They usually speak to, at least in the context of anarchism, the world of the below. So I guess this is where I find the resonance, right? Uh, but yes, it is a matter of taking pride and dignity and respect in one's own traditions and ways of being without having to constantly refer to your American ways of being in the world. Uh, there are some people that walk on the land, there are other people that walk with the land. Those that walk with the land are of the below. Those that want to walk on the land are of the above. But yeah, that's how I probably address or define the anarchistic component, that it is a commitment to non-authoritarian politics, the rejection of the world of the above, but not only a rejection, a building of a world of the below. Because it's one thing to reject something, it's another thing to construct an alternative.
And I think that's really helpful for people to take these understandings in as we're going to talk about um, all these various subjects from this perspective. All right, you said before that we failed Gaza, and I agree with you. So the question is, how have we failed Gaza? How have we failed the future, our people, and the youth? And let's start with the ways we failed Gaza in the ways that we speak about Gaza and Palestine and what we're doing.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Cannot the king insofar as failing Gaza, though collectively we have failed Gaza. There's no doubt about that. We have failed Gaza. I can speak for myself as a member of Generation X. We failed Gaza in not relaying, transmitting, sharing the breadth, the legacy of social movement struggles, histories, land back, abolitionist initiatives, transformations, analysis, including the 1492 analysis, which we'll speak of. In retrospect of all the movements that have emerged after Seattle and the anti-globalization movements of 1999, so the anti-war protests of Iraq and Afghanistan, the land back struggles, ones that I participated in, is with the Akwesasne and in the context and Kanasatake, and the Mohawks in Tantanega, and around 2005, abolitionist organizing, Black Spring, in the context of No Dakota, in the context of Tahrir, that I also lived 2011 and 2013. A lot can be said with regards to that, up until the context of Palestine. A lot of the youth, and our youth are what come from immortality and are the arrows that we shoot towards infinity, are ambivalent to that particular kind of history. And why Seattle 1999 becomes a very important juncture in the sense of how social movements have become more anarchistic, to go back to that term, in terms of their organizing. And why Tahrir hence fails, because of our reversion to a perspective of the above and a desire to seize state power in order to enact change. A lack of emphasis on building and the difference between mobilizing and organizing, because a lot of the pro-Palestinian protests are concerned and are focused on collecting power, on mass movements, which are highly problematic, as opposed to organizing and organizing within a tight-knit group of circles. And we can talk about why that is becomes very important, sort of organizing at the level of cells and the construction of alternatives. Lessons from the Panthers, right? Insofar as building, because mobilizing usually happens around issues, right? Whereas organizing, as Kwame Ture had noted, around structures. So what are we dealing with? Are we dealing with an American settler colony or a democracy? It can't be both. It's either a dream or a nightmare, as Malcolm. But our youth are the arrows that come from infinity, are the ones that we shoot towards immortality, as political prisoner Mohamed Abu Jamal had noted. The foundation that prisoners should be the backbone of our movement. We failed to incorporate that. Instead, we prop up influencers, overnight celebrities, Bassem Youssef. People have just recently come into the struggle, have just come to understand what Zionism means. We have propped up liberal Jews who proclaim themselves to be anti-Zionists, but are just merely liberal Zionists. The fact that our faces are out there, that is another dimension in which we have failed, right? As opposed to, again, building on what should have been learned from the Zapatistas of being nameless, faceless. The importance of combating inner ego, the importance of building community, of establishing alternatives. That's what the Zapatistas and the Black Panthers taught, to the breakfast programs, to say the least, right? Let alone alternative clinics and schools and so on. The Panthers, the Zapatistas, or Mujahideen built for at least a decade, if not decades, prior, right? And mutual aid projects and networks. And of course, there are mistakes that were embodied in the Panthers that elders of Shanti Alston, Lorenzo Irvin, others have pointed to. And hence they became more anarchistic in terms of their orientation, the hierarchy, the authoritarianism, the queerphobia, the sexism, that worked to the detriment of the Panthers. The myth of nonviolence, the importance of the transnational arc and component of the struggle, the fact that this is a racial and religious war. A lot of pro-Palestinians shy away from the fact that this is a spiritual war stretching back to 1492. Right? They merely focus on the racial animus or racial component of this war, right? The incorporation of a queer and a feminist analysis, because what we see right now is, like I said, mobilizations, mass protests that we had millions and millions out in the streets. And so far as the anti-war protest of Iraq and Afghanistan, that didn't stop the war on Iraq and Afghanistan. Far fewer numbers even in the context of Palestine. But what do we see? We see queerphobic, anti-critical race theory, Muslims that are also anti-feminist, and they're conjoined, and right now they're allying themselves with the alt-right, Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, even Nick Fuentes, because they are feeding into the cultural war, because they believe that AIPAC is in control of America, of Britain, all these myths without, again, this is the problem of not understanding 1492, and the fact that America is leading this crusading war. Canada is leading this crusading war, right? And Israel is but a mere instrument. But we have this collective of, like I said, anti-queer, anti-feminist, anti-critical race theory Muslims, anti-Zionist Jews, anti-spiritual leftists, queer Muslims and feminist Muslims, all who are walking, chanting down the streets, free, free Palestine, without even a strategy that unites them. What does a free Palestine mean? And nobody can tell you what a free Palestine means. Some believe in one state. I believe in a no-state solution, and we'll talk about how the Mujahideen are advocating for a no-state solution, actually, which is not being discussed either. As the general said, we defeated Zionism on October 7th, 2023, with the blessed Al-Aqsa blood. But we are now fighting the British and American, right? And nobody wants to heed that call. So people are even failing to study the Mujahideen in so many different ways, to become students. So even those who would advocate for the resistance, number one, they perceive that the resistance is a unified axis. We're going to talk about that. That is not the case. Islam advocates As much as I believe in an anti-imperialist stance, as much as I stand with Iran insofar as America against American and Zionist aggression, but they fight for an Islam of the above. Hezbollah is invested in a little bit of the above and below because it's also trying to uphold Lebanese sovereignty. We'll talk about that. But the perception that the axis is one front, it is not one. Everybody has abandoned Gaza. Everybody has not done enough, and hence we have failed. So, failed our youth. We collectively failed insofar as Gaza. We are failing insofar as tying how Gaza relates to Sudan, how Gaza relates to the Congo. Right? So we are circulating reels on devices in which we are advocating for Palestinian politics and vis-a-vis capitalist modus operandi on these devices and on these phones that are mined of copper and cobalt from the Congo, another genocide. And so whatever forms of superficial analysis that we're engaged in is not laid within a broader framework, 1492 analysis, I keep on saying this, nor is it based in a strategic social movement outlook and vision, because there's a failure to understand the difference between strategy and tactic. Right? So these reasons we have failed, and we can address the various components, encampments, how they have failed, trying to reconfigure themselves in relationship to settler institutions such as Colombia. But we have each failed according to the stratas and the positions in which we are situated. But these are all dimensions in which we have failed our people, and we failed and we have failed indigenous and even Black struggles in the context of Turtle Island, given the ongoing genocide of indigenous and Black people.
So you would say that we've failed in the ways that we organize and mobilize by having no continuity with both the past and with each other. And I've experienced that in organizing. Every time a new issue comes up, it feels like we're starting all over again. And it's really frustrating because definitely how I thought we should do things 30 years ago is different than what I think now because I've learned over that time and grown from it. So, I mean, because we don't have this continuity, it's really frustrating when we start all over again and I hear ideas that I believed in 30 years ago with when I was much more naive. But and somebody in that time was probably just as frustrated with me because you're right, we don't have this. How do we change this and create this continuity?
Number one, unity. We all uphold Malcolm, but Malcolm was non-ideological. And Malcolm was our shining black prince because of his endless ability to engage in a project of metamorphosis. The most incredible revolutionaries are incredible listeners and incredibly humble, and they're not ideological because they learn vis-a-vis the concept of African concept of Sankofa, their past and their evolution. I appreciate Patrice Lumumba, I appreciate Kwame Ture, I appreciate Stokely Carmichael, everybody from Amy Cesar to everybody else, right? But mistakes have been made in social movement histories, and we stand on the shoulders of our elders. But the failure to interrogate and hence to become ideological, that, oh, the Marxist-Leninists are here, the anarchists are here, and the anarchists are infighting because the spiritual versus non-spiritual or anti-spiritual anarchists. And the Marxists propping up Russia and China, despite the fact that they subscribe to world of the above. It becomes this egomaniacal war that social media has also contributed to, because it becomes about clickbaits, one-upping one another, as opposed to, and this is the absence of, a culture of hospitality and ethics of hospitality that has to be animated by an ethics of knowing the other and investing in the other, building community on the ground, not over social media. Social media is merely a tool and it's a boom that can be used towards good or towards bad. But often enough, it becomes a tool in which one's unflinching ego is constantly being basked in. Culture of hospitality in which we are getting to know one another on the land, in which we are building one another, in which we are contending with our insecurities or fears. Our positionality is given our privileges and complicities. And we'll talk about that too. Settler immigrants of color in the context of the recent election of Mandani, which I know we'll talk about, referring to New York as New Yorkistan, and somebody like Mandani is a caliph. Well, you're settler immigrants on stolen land. What, you want to colonize already colonized and occupied land? That's not my Islam. So please don't call it that. Right? So it's an appeal constantly to the above that we are a part of. And we don't have an ethics of disagreement, an ethics of conflict resolution, right? We gatekeep one another. We don't produce knowledge. We produce memes. We produce fast analysis. People don't even read 140 characters on Twitter, let alone actually listen to a conversation. Listening is not the same as hearing, because hearing means I've already prepared a response back to what has been said, as opposed to listening to the other's mother's tongue. And to think and to reflect when you use the word love, when you use the word indigenous, when you use the word sovereignty, do I understand it in the same way? We don't read, sadly, or a lot of people don't read that way. And so we're reproducing the theories of the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. We romanticize the past as opposed to contending with the material realities of the present. And so we don't have an ethics of disagreement amongst us. We tear each other apart. We are in a circle and engage in a firing squad against one another. And of course, that is emblematic because, and that is the case because we've been socialized with the nation state. It's our beautiful father. So many different ways. The state teaches us how to discipline, to control, to govern, to categorize others. Oh, you're not a male or a female. You must be trans. You must be FTM or MTF, all that, right? So we police one another, right, in tone, in being, presence, politics. But we're also individualist and materialist, and we take that from our beautiful mother, which is capitalism, right? She teaches us how to construct all relations into an instrument of utility. I merely know you because I want something out of you, and vice versa, right? As opposed to the selflessness, like our mujahideen, like the Zapatistas, who plant seeds not knowing whether they are going to bear witness to the fruition of those seeds, the germination of seeds. So how do we overcome that? That's a question I guess we're going to explore by embodying all these things that we are not embodying, by being on the land, by situating ourselves where we are situated according to an analysis that binds all our struggles together, ideally 92. By paying attention to the fact that, you know, when Trump calls Somalis in Minnesota garbage, of course, that is unacceptable and this is racist, to say the very least. But the solution to that is not to reproduce the ethno-nationalism that Trump and MAGA use as a spearhead in their crusading war, in their racial savage war against people of color, by saying, well, Somalis in Minnesota are engaged in the manifest destiny they discovered, or we're discovering all these memes that are appearing online. Minnesota, and they're migrating to Minnesota. This is Dakota land, Anishinaabe Ojibwe land. So what are we talking about here? And then people posting, oh, look at these Somali soldiers, look at these Somali police officers that are also American. American is a colonial identity. Again, it can't be both. It can be a settler colony, it can be a democracy. So take your pick. They are hypocrites. That a lot of people are hypocrites because they don't want to confront. They want to have their cake and eat it too. To be able to point at a faraway monster, smaller monster, without dealing with the larger monster in the mirror, because they don't have an understanding of history. And so, yeah, undoing all this factionalism means that we need to invest in each other, and that can only happen on the ground by building an alternative and building that alternative in secrecy, which we'll talk about, and by confronting the inner micro-fascisms that we've all internalized from daddy and from mom.
I want to explore how specifically we're failing the youth when we show up. How are we failing them? And one things I've noticed in smaller places, there's either young people organizing or older people organizing. In larger places, there might be more both, but there can be sometimes some conflict between the two. How are we failing the youth when we show up or don't show up with them or show up without them in organizing?
I think the humility in drawing on the encampments, which I know we'll talk about, goes both ways. Because we're failing again as part of that archival history, that continuity that you had noted. I absolutely agree with you in terms of sharing what works and what doesn't work and why, and explaining why, and doing so with the utmost humility. Um, but that's because of the degree of urgency and emerged state of emergency that the youth feel that they're producing or reinventing a wheel in a way that nobody has done before. When one becomes an overnight activist, right? Everybody seems to call themselves an activist
And
nowadays, right?
I do want to point out that it's not just the youth that are overnight activists. There are a lot of people our age stepping up for the first time.
Absolutely, right? There's a pretending of, I know what's best. I know how to free Palestine without, again, an analysis and a framing and a strategy or the experience. The problem, the best revolutionary is somebody who combines three qualities, in my humble opinion. Number one, they're very radically, not to be academic, interdisciplinary in their outlook, in the sense that they've invested in indigenous struggles and knowledges, Black struggle and knowledges, Muslim, queer, feminist, myriad of different perspectives to be able to try and have a firm understanding of how to ground these struggles all in relationship to one another. So the propaganda knowledge base for component is important. The second thing is somebody, also a characteristic of somebody, an inspired revolutionary, somebody who's got their hands dirty in our lingo. Somebody who's been a part, does have social movement backgrounds, if you will, right? And has invested in struggles, has been a part of struggles, not only on the front lines in terms of, say, land defense, but has actually built alternatives, workers' cooperatives, for instance, community or social centers, and so on and so forth. Built on the land, learned how to grow food, and so on. And three, somebody who has a good geopolitical analysis. Those three formulate a trifecta. And somebody who is accessible, hence in their knowledge. So in so many ways, those who are just coming into the movement, be they youth or elderly or older, let's put it this way, uh, there isn't a shepherding, a caretaking for youth in the sense that, you know, here's how struggles are interconnected. This is what I've learned from decades worth of work, decades of being on the ground. And the youth are not humble enough in retrospect to be like, let's sit down and listen. And why has this worked? Because the youth carry also a great deal of revitalized fire, of energy. They are the beacons of light and hope for us. They are the futurity. And we hand over the baton, the torch to them. But there's also a need, again, for that mutual exchange, that love, that affection. But we haven't cultivated relations with the youth, and hence the youth have no reason to trust us, and vice versa. We assume, again, as much as a white anarchist would appear at the landmark standoff, just because they are present, and therefore the trust is to be implicit or explicit. Well, that's not the case. Indigenous people have no reason to trust settler immigrants of color. Same thing with the Black siblings, same thing with the youth insofar as adults. We have not earned that trust. We have not built with them. The youth have been betrayed by the dominant order, by the system, by corporations, by politicians. And they've also been betrayed by all the adults in their lives, from their parents to those that they meet on the street. And they are finding one another, and they engage in a great deal of ingenuity. No doubt about it. But this is where the building of that trust becomes really vital for us to be able to walk with them their path on our mutually intertwined paths, for us to bequeath them what has been bequeathed and handed over to us, for us to be renourished because they offer a blood transfusion that provides us with a hope and a dignity and a desire to not only survive as adults, um, but a reason to continue to thrive together. So there's a lot that we can learn from one another. God bless them. Not too long ago was when the youth of Tahrir. Um, um, but yes, every successive generation fails the other for lots of different reasons. From continuity, from the absence of an ethics of disagreement, the politics of hospitality, and earned trust that is fomented on and that is built on and is concretized in actions. In solidarity is a verb; it's not a noun, right? And in examples in terms of character, because revolutions are not just an abstract idea; they involve the transformation of the self, the greater jihad, right? So combating not just the Mubarak, the Pharaoh, but recognizing that there is a mini Mubarak, there is a mini Obama, there is a mini Bernie Sanders, there's a mini Mamdani inside each and every single one of us. Because we are conditioned, particularly as people of color, to opt for survival as opposed to thriving. Uh, because we will only share what we can spare. But being selfless involves a transformation of our character insofar as the way that we eat, the way that we drink, the way that we breathe, the way that we conceive of intimacy. And that's the greater jihad, Islam. So modeling that and modeling it not only in terms of our metamorphosis, as I was talking in the context of Malcolm, but also in terms of our demeanor, our softness, our gentleness, combined with our militancy at the same time. But not through a holier than thou aura, an ego, which again we tend to reproduce. Children and youth are very much inclined, as we know. I'm not a parent, as you know. Hope to perhaps someday, but they possess the original inherent indigeneity or fitra, the original condition in which, as the Quran, as Allah Subhanahu wa Taala says, uh, children are born into the world to connect, to reformulate the we that they experience in their mother's womb. With a
Mhm.
rose that grows out of a concrete pavement as a middle finger to civilization to mature. With the nations of the plants and animals and non-human life. They do not see skin color, they do not see gender until they become socialized, perceive and construct life in these manifestations and forms that are premised upon white modernity, enlightenment politics, categorizations, uh, white supremacy. And liberalism is the bosom of white supremacy because it created a linguistic, anthropological way and a mental gymnastics and a way of ontologically being in the world and a set of practices that accompany it at the same time. And so
Yeah.
become wired that way, despite the fact that that's not our initial wiring. But
And
the mind is like a sponge, right? And it will take what it is that you throw at it.
on this point, it is really interesting too that like the age when children start to recognize and categorize people by race, which is around age 3 and 4, is also the age, traditionally speaking, where a child is most likely to stop being able to see spirit without there being something to maintain that connection.
Mhm,
Because we're
mhm,
also socialized to not see spirit, and we lose that connection to our original instructions, and that umbilical cord gets further severed.
mhm,
um mhm.
mhm,
And also the youth have a role in our traditions too, and 14 to 21 is the age of rebellion, and that's their role, that's their job. If we don't listen to them about how to change society, our societies become stagnant, and if they become stagnant, they'll become more oppressive, which, you know, has played out to be true in all of these ways. How do we limit the futures and possibilities that we dream when we do things like don't have this continuity, when we don't understand how we connect through generations and through peoples and through different struggles, when we aren't upholding and supporting and giving the youth the tools. And when we are only thinking in these confined bubbles, how are we limiting the future of what we dream?
A lot of so if colonialism and imperialism stripped anything from us, it's Black, Indigenous, people of color, a problematic acronym because we have Black, Indigenous people, Black people of color, so on and so forth. But this is the identity reductionist LGBTIQ sort of way of conceiving of the world. It is our ability to dream dangerously. It is our ability to become fluid like water, to rise like air, um, to be vapor, to be malleable, to be dynamic, because nothing in life is static. And the best of us are those who engage in self-critique. And the best of us are those who dream dangerously, to dream the impossible and to make it possible, to lay the seeds. And youth offer that potential. They are fearless. As one grows into adulthood, one becomes entrenched in the world of the above and the survivalist necessities of the 9 to 5 job, of the car, of the house, of the gas, of the making ends meet, over a little bit of relinquished time. And this is the myth of capitalism, that it freed time for entertainment and so on and so forth, despite the fact that we're constantly entangled within it. Right? And we actually work more now, are enslaved more now, are beholden to it now. The economies of scale and the dollar on and the God we trust on the dollar bill is so much for a secular society. Right? But we internalize fear. We begin to constrict, shackle, or constrain, sorry, shackle, imprison both ourselves and our imagination, which is the antithesis of abolition, the very freeing of our minds, spirits, and souls. And we engage in this excising in the severance because we are not in community as adults. And yes, we have our nuclear family and our relations that way. We are betrayed by the world and we reproduce that betrayal. We internalize it and we teach others to mimic it, to transpose it, to reproduce it. And that's our Achilles heel. That's our death knell. Because if we had a semblance of, as the Quran says, we have created you from different tribes and nations so that you may get to know one another. The best amongst you are those that exercise taqwa. What is taqwa? Piety. What is piety? It is attached to spiritual, ethical, political commitments. Well, we don't invest in those nations and tribes, be it human, non-human, be it across genders, be it across races, be it across age groups, stages in life. Our priorities are turned upside down because of the way that we've been plugged into the system. And we've been so seduced by the world, so enamored by it. The Quran teaches, وَمَا الْمَالُ وَالْبَنُونَ لِزِينَةِ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا, and children and money or wealth are nothing but ornaments in life. They're beautiful gifts. But they become they possess us in turn. And this is why, like, even worshiping one's own children, one needs to care for the child, one needs to love the child, to tend for them, to walk with them their journey. But they don't own that child. And to allow them the reins to lead the adult, to lead the grown-up, to earn their place of responsibility within community, because it's not a matter of rights either. The state and the above works through a logic of rights. Within our communities, it's through a politics of responsibility. The story of Al-Hassan al-Hussein, the grandchildren of the Prophet, peace be upon him. And see, this is what children, and when we pay attention to the element of demeanor that we spoke about earlier, the ethics of politics, the lack of ego, the selflessness, where they noticed that an elderly man was performing the process of ablution, cleansing before they pray. But they weren't performing it correctly. And so Al-Hasan looked at Al-Hussein, the grandchildren, they were children, the grandchildren of the Prophet, peace be upon him, because they were performing evolution as well. And instead of scolding that man, instead of shaming, because we know that shaming and scolding and guilt, these are reactionary emotions, they benefit nobody. And in fact, they re-entrench this self-victimized, narcissistic sort of uh, ego in the process. Right? Never benefits in the reactionary negative emotion. So nothing comes good out of it. So instead of shaming this elderly man, Al Hassan looked at Hussein and said, you know, Hussein, will you teach me, remind me again how we perform evolution? And so they caught the elderly man's attention and he started to pay attention to the way that evolution is done correctly. So there are no words exchanged between them and the elderly man, but they set an example. And neither the man was shamed, nor did they reenact that shame. And the Quran, in so many ways, acts and emphasizes that as communities and nations, we constantly lose one another. This is why it's filled with parables, it's filled with metaphors, it's filled with a retelling of stories that all nations of the world, oh Jews, oh Christians, oh Muslims, pay attention to XYZ that has happened historically to you and to you and to you. Because we are meant as a tazkira, as a gentle reminder. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, you know, if I wanted to create you all as one nation, I could have done so easily. I have the spirit world, the angelic world, and there are angels that bow towards Creator. You know, that's all that they do, that carry the Creator's throne, literal or metaphor. That's a philosophical discussion that one doesn't have to get into. That's always interesting, of course. It opens up the imagination, and this is the beauty as opposed to foreclosing. Because I mean, also as people of color, we've been trained because of white supremacy, because of liberalism, to conceive of things as reasonable and rational according to white ways of perceiving what rationality and reason are, despite that all rationality is a region carved out of that which is irrational. Somebody can rationalize creator, somebody doesn't conceive of them as something that's rational, or them as something that's rational. But anyways, the Quran is meant to emphasize the element of reason. And as the Quran and the appreciation of also that which is unknown, al-ghayb, so not just reason, but also that which cannot be perceived, that which cannot be seen, that is yet to be discovered. Or Allah says that if I want to create you as a single community, I could have done so. But I created you as different, because difference doesn't necessarily need to lead to dissension, to shiqaq, to separation. This is why the Prophet is told, وَجَادِلْهُمْ بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ, and debate with them with what is better, and hence better in character. Right. When the Prophet is told, وَإِن كُنْتَ فَظًّا غَلِيظَ الْقَلْبِ لَانْفَضُّوا مِنْ حَوْلِكَ, and if you are of wicked heart and wicked tongue, they would have left you. If you scolded people and this is right, this is wrong. And that's all that this was about. I mean, any prophet that starts off that way is not much of a prophet or a messenger, nor will earn the wisdom. It's not even a wise way as an approach. You weren't even attain the listening ear, let alone the dignity and respect of your people, right? And that is the kind of wise revolutionary love that again debates, but debates with a particular mannerism and being. So we act in paternalistic ways towards our youth. We don't listen to them. We don't treat them, of course, they're youth and they're children, but we don't give them the respect that is due unto them as adults. We disrespect as if they don't have a wisdom to teach us, to impart on us, to see the world differently, to fill in the gaps. But they are gateways to, and I mentioned this word just right now, to al-ghayb, to the unknown. There are chapters in the Quran that begin with verses of al-ghayb, verses that nobody knows the meaning. Chapter 2, chapter of the cow, begins with the letters alif, lam, mim. Three Arabic letters conjoined to form a Roman Arabic word that nobody knows the meaning. And it's meant to humble Arabs. It's meant to humble the reader, right? That this is your language and it you will never come to understand or comprehend. There are more blank spaces on the page than it was in black. But my point being is that children act as those gates because they're an extension of the spirit world, especially before, say, the age of 3, as you had noted, and before the cultivation and the molding of a certain monstrosity inside, right? Gradually and excessively and more intensely as the years and the days go by. Um, because they are so innocent and they possess that element of the fitra and that original indigeneity that scares us. I think uh, this is the facet. When we look at our mujahideen, when we look at the Zapatistas, they assign a huge weight um, to the role of the youth. For mujahideen, because the Zionist onslaught doesn't allow our children to live. So our children become adults because they become orphaned very quickly, right? And so we are taught from a very young age that our very mere breath is resistance. Um, and but our elders invest in that and cultivate that. And this is why the General Sanwar being monitored, this is why Mohammed Commander al-Dayf. One thing about Commander al-Dayf and his demeanor, right? This is somebody who went around, first of all, nobody knew what he looked like. And he would spend every other night in a different home and separated from his family. Um, and he still kept up with his kids and what they were learning in terms of Quran, in terms of English, in terms of their studies. He would donate half his salary towards women and those stricken with cancer and children stricken with cancer. He would make toys and dolls and walk around Gaza and distribute them to the kids. So look at the softness and gentleness and demeanor of character. With the Mujahideen and the youth of the Mujahideen, he would act as their older brother. Although he, was quote unquote more senior as a commander within Al-Qassam. But he would tend to them, he would laugh with them, he would joke with them, he would put a smile, he would tell them, well, instead of learning how to just wield an RPG or a Scene 105 or a Labul sniper, I want you to learn various different skills. Because that is the way in which you decentralize power, that is the way in which you support one another. And God forbid if one of us falls or is martyred, that means that the struggle of our people continues. This is the humility, right? This is the beauty of walking alongside our youth and our people and being there for them and not expecting anything in return, not wanting anything in return. As the Quran says, and as I recently shared in one of the videos, that the most blessed people are not only those who spend in the way of Allah, such that the left hand does not know what the right hand has given, because what they give does not even belong to them in the first place, but are also those who do not expect even a thank you in return, and whose only words are, "Oh Allah, oh Creator, we only look to gratitude and thanks to and from you. We want nothing more. We covet your sight. We covet your presence, and we covet your blessing. We don't want anything. We don't even the person that we're helping to thank us, the poor, the destitute, the houseless, the woman, the elderly, the children. We do it only for the sight of your pleasure, right? And so, what is it to walk in the world as an unknown, as somebody who is unnamed? How many of our master mujahideen whose names we actually know, who have sacrificed themselves in the most valiant, the most courageous, the most loving of ways, who recite verses from the Quran and conduct the most incredible operations, taking out Zionists in the calmest, most serene of manner, because the embodiment of their sumud and their steadfastness is spirit, and spirit of mind that allows them a spirit of focus in their actions. And then after that, they strap something around their waist or an improvised explosive device, and they go and they put it into attached to the rear of the tank or to the wheels of an Abraham's tank, or even inside, the hatchet of the tank, and watch it explode. Selfless, resilient, unflinching, unafraid. And this is why Zionists, this is why Crusaders could never match that kind of resilience of spirit and strength. But this is what is bequeathed to the youth. And a lot, even since the assassinations, the murder, the genocide, starvation campaigns of our people in Gaza, a lot of those who have killed the Yanks are 18 and 19 and 20 and 21-year-olds.
Mhm.
And the
Yeah.
general Salwar taught the Mujahideen, these youth, and the same thing with the Taifa, there are records with regards to that, whereby they are told when they would go into a home and in the midst of the starvation campaign, and there are genuine reports of this, factual reports, not the 40 beheaded babies false reports, legitimate reports, whereby the Mujahideen, young as they are, they would go into homes and they would be starving because they starve as our people starve. And they would see food on the table because our people had to flee their homes. Over a quarter of a million homes, if not actually 500,000 buildings have been destroyed, and mosques and churches and schools and hospitals. But anyways, having to flee, and they may find some hope, some food that was left on the dinner table or whatever. We told you don't touch that. This home belongs to one of your siblings. I don't care how hungry or how starved that you are. If our people starve, you starve. And this is how we contend. So the sense of loyalty is reconstructed according to different terms. The dealing with traitors within our communities, because it's not about bloodlines. It's not about a shared Palestinian identity. If you betray your people, you betray your people. And on you falls the punishment of al-had, because there's nothing more treacherous than that. There's nothing more, because you're not only breaking sort of the struggle of Palestine's liberation, and the telos or the arc of that. You're betraying a covenant that we have made as a people with Creator, with Allah, and for a higher moral, on a higher ethical, and a higher political, and a higher spiritual grounding than some kind of identitarian connection that exists between us because we were born on a parcel of land and what we share. This is why we have black and brown and red-skinned folks with white masks. Being indigenous doesn't mean that you are actually of indigenous character. And the same thing with being black. You can be black and Zionist, indigenous Zionist. There are tons of people that are Arab and Zionist, anarchists who are Islamophobic. That doesn't make us a member of the same ummah, same community, of the same covenant of spirit, of belief, of unflinching resolve. So this is what our mujahideen are taught. This is what the youth are taught from a young age. So, and this is why they are our compass with all their beauty. And that does not mean that they are flawless. That does not mean we don't engage in purity politics here. But they represent the best of us. They represent the rays of the sun in so many ways that we can only aspire to bask in their warmth, in their light, in their grace. And they are in a race against time, their own lives. Yeah, and one with the earth, and one with our mother and the spirit, because they are not attached nor do they covet this world, because they know that the reward and that joining the ancestor is a far greater honor if one dies and is martyred on their feet than if they live dying on their knees.
So I always enjoy when you talk about dreaming dangerously. And also, it feels like there's always another part of it to talk about. And so I enjoy that too. Um, and several times you brought up the unknown. And this is interesting to me. In Lakota cosmologies, the 16th creation spirit is the whirlwind in English, but it represents the unborn, the things yet to be, the things that will never be, the things that we don't know, the things that we'll never know. Um, and so this was of interest to me that you bring this up, and also relationships and in the relationships we have with like the very young and the very old, they do encourage us to dream and think about things outside of what we've always been told, because kids will ask questions you didn't think of. And that is another role they have, to ask us questions, because they'll make us think creatively. And if we're wise, we will also do that dangerously.
And they can tell what's fake and what's real. And they can tell when adults are afraid. and are of limited knowledge or don't know, but profess or proclaim in a hypocritical sense that they do know that which they don't know. You reminded me of the vicissitudes sort of humanity and cultivation. That what wonder is it that one is born a child whose body is frail but is fearless, and they will jump and break their arms and their legs on merry-go-rounds and in playgrounds to test very boldly the very limits and the very confines of their own body, because their spirits are larger than their bodies. And then that became tamed in an adult that is of resilient body, is of wielded strength, emboldened, but who's not, and it's not easy being crazy, who's not as crazy in their madness so as to jump off swings in the same way as a child would be tempted to. And whose imagination and spirit is then becomes constrained to somebody who's elderly and who is of frail body because they return back to that state of childhood. And most of the time, whose spirit has been dimmed. Um, this is the sad reality of the cycle of life as we have conceived it. But are magnanimous and unflinching that way, um, because they reveal a lot insofar as the very limits of this historical materialist, this Euro-American leftist perception that in order for a revolution to happen, which is very egomaniacal and very arrogant, we have to have everything down to a dot and a T. And the reason that that is egomaniacal is because it assumes that the spirit world, that our Mother Earth, that our ancestors have nothing more to teach us, despite the fact that we rely on them as opposed to the other way around. Our Mother Earth is what produces the air that we breathe, the very food that we eat, and the various different fruits and vegetables within the same category, of which there are multiplicity. How many different types of dates are there? How many different types of bees within the same category of a bee? And it's very incredible that symbiotic relationships that non-human life have relationship to, one another. We have the three sisters, of course, in the context of Turtle Island, the squash, the beans, the maize, the corn, their support for one another, but we don't know. This is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala needs so many chapters in the Quran after non-human life. The chapter of the moon, the chapter of the sun, the chapter of the bees, the chapter of the thunder, the chapter of the elephant, the chapter of the ants. The idea isn't literal that this is the chapter of the bees, but although there are wisdoms to be gained and lost from non-human life that way. But the bees have something to reveal to us, or the cosmology of non-human life. And this is why they're not anthropological objects as Marxism conceives of them. They're not property. We are merely walking with them on this journey. And we either choose to be in relational, symbiotic coexistence with them, but they are the providers of our spirit, of our nourishment, of our feed, of our love, of our affection. They are the ones that give us spawn and embolden our words and give meaning to the world in a world in which liberalism has both, in an Orwellian 1984 kind of way, emptied both words and their meaning at the same time. But no, we can't know everything in advance. What arrogant position is it to assume in our demagoguery, in our fascistic existence, such a blinding way of conceiving of the world? And this is why our revolutions fail, because we are not a part of conceiving ourselves as part of that revolution, because we don't embody, again, how the youth are an extension of that cosmos that we're precisely talking about. Yeah.
And you were also talking about youth who are orphans. Whirlwind also represents orphans. And when you're orphaned, either losing one or two parents, like it's an injury to your soul, but it
Mhm.
also opens a space where you can sacrifice that where others with a more intact soul maybe cannot. And I
Mhm.
think this is why you often see, youth with those losses grow up to be warriors in various revolutions.
The wounding is very critical to the making of character because, again, a child falls in order to get back on their feet. And when you undergo that experience, as harsh, as traumatic as that is, and healing never ends. I mean, this is the narcissistic self-care that never ends, and people are obsessed with it. But to become a warrior is to become fierce with the world, to understand that the only resting place that manifests is really when we join the spirit of the ancestors and we have an earned honor, given the responsibilities that we shoulder and that we bear. Because we are unsheltered and because precisely we are wounded. And this is why the right of al-yatama becomes something that's deeply sacred. And the orphans are referred to as al-yatama in the Quran. They are deeply sacred. And
Yeah.
anybody who transgresses the responsibilities that they have towards orphans, particularly, because they are the ones that are the fringes, on the edges, the abandoned, and embody the most frail state because of the severance of kinship, insofar as community, or at least the potential of that, and family, and sheltering, and love, and deep warmth, and at such a young age, from a mother, from a parent, and the sacredness of that. Um, it's a deep travesty and devastation when one neglects the responsibilities. And the Prophet was an orphan. And this is why it was so vital. Moses, in a certain sense, was orphaned.
Yeah.
Jesus, alayhi salam, uh, was born of, well, there's immaculate conception, did not have a father, of course. We all know that story, and white Christians would presume that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is their father. Of course, Muslims disagree with that perspective. That's another discussion altogether. But his mother was Maryam. And as the Quran relates, that when Maryam brought Isa alayhi salam to her family and to her community, they were like, how could you bring such a child, and who is their father? And then she pointed to Isa. They pointed to Jesus, and he said, um, that I do not have a father, and my mother did not do anything that was wrong in the first place, but I am a miracle child that way. But in a certain sense, hence an orphan, right? So yeah, when we think of the beginning of the world, whether we go by the story of Sky Woman, whether we go by Adam and Eve, the element of orphanage is built into so many different cosmologies, and the rendering of, in a certain sense, an orphaned humanity, one that is abandoned to their own, but never really abandoned. If we connect to the umbilical cord and a realization that there is a greater guiding spirit that moves through us and courses through all of us. It is the atom's weight of goodness that exists within us, and that are all part of the formulated great spirit that exists in the world and in the cosmos.
So, for folks, we're going to wrap this up and we're going to do this again soon and not make you wait like 2 years this time.
So inshallah not.
So, people can also put questions in the comments. And these were some of my questions I wanted to explore, but I would really love to know some of the questions Mohammed would love to explore for next time also.
We'll do this again soon. And thank you so much for taking the time and your labor, your generous hospitality, and your insight. We go way back, and I'm grateful for every moment that we get to spend reflecting on our people, our movements, on our intertwined faiths, um, on lessons from our ancestors and our elders.